Hello everyone, this is a video update for just you guys on the project team and anyone else on XR. This isn't like one for social media. I'm very aware that I sent around an email very quickly saying that the Citizens Assembly meeting had gone well, but I hadn't given you any more information. So this is a general kind of run through. I thought it would save a very long email for me, but also I thought it might be more nicer for you to watch it rather than read a whole long email. And feel free to send it around to anyone you like. And I just thought it'd save 10 minutes at the next meeting. Or you'd have time to chew things over. So the meeting was really good and I left really positive and buzzing and I was really pleased with how I did and everything. I think mainly those feelings were just grateful that we live in a city that is doing this. I'm pleased that people did seem to be taking it really seriously and stuff like that. I'm definitely still have concerns about how it's run. I think it's definitely going to be a solid Citizens Assembly. I don't think it's going to be best practice Citizens Assembly for climate change. But I'll just give you a kind of what happened first. So there were 17 people in the room. There's a lot of people in the room. The advisory panel people, but then also notably Alan Renwick, who is a UCL constitutional academic, and Paul Carroll, who's the main guy at Ipsos Mori, who's going to be kind of leading on this. And then a whole load of administrative people who are doing the lifting, heavy lifting. And then Mish, of course, but then also one person who hadn't really kind of come across yet was Jo Colwell, who is the City Council officer lead person on environment and biodiversity. And she's really in charge of the content. So Mish is in charge of the processy type stuff, and she's really in charge of the content and the speakers and the experts and that kind of stuff. And I think she's the person that we're going to have probably the most influence on. And she's really nice and she really believes in it. And we walked out afterwards together through town. So that was really good. And she definitely gave me the impression that she didn't have that many ideas and she didn't know yet what she wanted to put in and all that kind of stuff. So I think there is a lot of room for influencing there. So so the people in the room were people that I've said with those additions. The first thing we did was go through the terms of reference. So this was the one that we've seen and we agreed it. Richard Pantlin asked for an amendment to say that the advisory board was also doing something on the process of the Citizens Assembly, because that's what he saw as his contribution, obviously. And it didn't really explicitly say that, and that's partly because we're not actually giving that much feedback on the process because the process has essentially been decided. But we did get it into the terms of reference. So that was cool. Then the next thing that we spent a lot of time on was Alan Renwick gave us this really deep dive into the Brexit Citizens Assembly that he had run with UCL. So this was about 2 years ago. It was on Brexit and it was in Manchester, but it was national. People from all over, and it was considered to be a very good process, although it didn't have any kind of impact like Ireland did. The process was actually apparently better on this one, but it didn't have any impact because obviously the government aren't listening to anything on Brexit. And it was done for research purposes, not in consultation with any kind of political body. So, but this presentation really influenced the council. So they changed stuff in the route as he told, as he talked, and just made decisions, which I'll come to one of them, which I'm not that happy about. So yeah, it had a big impact. So his was 2 weekends. It was 50 people. So it was very much the same format. They had a learning phase and then deliberation and decision-making phase. Involve led it, with the facilitators. They had 7 to 8 facilitators per table and a note taker, so to have a facilitator on the table and somebody taking notes, because it was for research. They wanted to know how people use language and all kinds of really quite detailed stuff. I don't think we need a note taker and a facilitator. I'm going to try and find out what the budget lines are. So the thing that's really key and kind of interesting with this one is that because it was Brexit, you had a very solid way of sorting people, because you could ask people, did you vote Remain, did you vote Leave, did you not vote? And so they made sure they had a proportional group of people in the room who were those according to the national statistics. So of course we don't have that because climate change isn't Brexit. So you can ask people whether you're concerned about it and all that kind of stuff, but you haven't got such a clear-cut thing. And also you will have people coming to this who are still don't understand it or don't think it's happening. There will be a few. Whereas nobody came to Brexit one thinking that Brexit wasn't happening, So it is trickier. And the reason, when I explain why, what you're actually trying to get out of it, that kind of stuff makes a real difference. So they focused on 2 specific things with the Brexit thing. They focused on trade and they focused on migration, and they just picked them because they felt like those were the two key parts of Brexit. I can't remember how they particularly picked it. It was asked, but he didn't give a particularly strong answer. And what they did is they had 4 options, because it's Brexit again. It's simpler, so it's like they took the referendum as given, that it was sort of coming back, remaining, like turning the referendum around wasn't an option, but it would stay in the customs union with a deal. It was 4 options, and I can't remember what it was. It doesn't matter. But they had 4 solid options, and they had 3 to start off with. But then people in the room didn't realise some of the stuff. Leavers hadn't realised some of the stuff you could do, and still have Brexit. And so they created a 4th option as the weekends progressed, so that there were 4 things to vote on at the end. But everything was followed on trade and migration, trade and migration, trade and migration. So everyone's like, these 2 things were the things that made things tangible. And then at the end, they voted on these 4 options, which was stay in the customs union with a deal, move out of the customs union with a deal, whatever, something, no deal. And so they had a series of votes throughout the whole thing. They met on the Friday night. So they actually, on both weekends, they met on the Friday night and had people, went through the rules and went through the kind of, people got to know each other, did some icebreakers, all that kind of stuff. I asked if we could do that, and the council won't do that. I think it makes a real difference in terms of the timing. Everyone was very against asking people to come on a Friday night. But they did get them to extend the day. So it was they haven't advertised the day yet. Before they said 10 to. They haven't advertised the day publicly, but they've said it was 10 till 4, and I said please can we make it like 9:30 to 5:30 and give that extra time. Then Alan Renwick said, you could extend it a bit, but maybe make it 10 till 5, so I've got an extra hour, which is kind of annoying that his word was like. Anyway, so, and they had an actual deliberative task on the Friday, so that, like, really, really simple thing about not to do with Brexit, but they kind of got into the process of it. And then they started really, 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 really basic. What do you love about your country with Brexit? And I think that's where we need to start, kind of with climate change as well. What do you love about, I don't know, nature or something? There were very few briefing papers in advance. They had Q&A, various things. There's a lot of preparation, or a lot of changing that went on between the citizens' assemblies. So based on what was happening in terms of like the process and the content, which was going to go for the second one, was changed and based on the first. Like bringing in this 4th option, for example, so there isn't an advisory meeting set for in between the citizens' assemblies, and I think there possibly should be, and I'm going to raise that at the next meeting. Then the second weekend happened, and they recapped on it. They had very, very little time on trade-offs, so they didn't spend a lot of time going, if you want migration to be lowered, then you have to have trade lowered. They didn't do that. Because they had, interestingly, a phenomenal amount of agreement. So Remainers and Leavers really, really wanted the same kinds of things, assuming that on the basis that Brexit was going to happen. Basically, everyone wanted to stay in the customs union, and so they didn't spend a lot of time on trade-offs. But I think in ours they're going to have to spend a lot of time on trade-offs because it's all about trade-offs. So that's going to be problematic. So then they did various different things. Okay. So then when we did the sorting stuff, Maury told us how they're going to be doing it. And the guy at Maury was not that au fait with everything. He definitely I got the impression he comes to the meeting not really being that prepared, or maybe not really thinking we were going to be so asking so many detailed questions, but he really didn't know stuff. Anyway, he said, so what's happened is that this thing has gone out, this residents panel thing, invitation in the post. He didn't know how many numbers. He's going to bring that back at the next meeting. He didn't know that they were also being handed out outside Tesco's. He's going to find out how many places they were handed out and where. It was based on the post office address file, so anybody could equally be invited. There was no mention of the Citizens' Assembly. You have to go online to apply. We think that we don't know there's another way to apply on it because no one had the piece of paper. So he's going to find out that if there was another way of applying. when they've got people who've applied for the residence assembly, they're going to do a first round of sortition. They think it's very, very likely they won't get the full range of people from that, because only certain people will have applied to be on the residence panel, unsurprisingly. So the way they're going to aggregate it is age, gender, ethnicity, and the only ethnicity they've got is, are you a minority or are you white? Or social class, and by social class they're going to do ABC1 and C2DE. And then then the really important thing, which is really interesting, is should you have people who, given that we're treating climate change as a given, should you have people who don't think climate change is real, or who are deniers, or in some form, which are actually relatively low in the population, but there will be a few still. And should you, and so our agreement on that unanimously was yes, definitely, like nobody should be excluded on that basis. But they will ask a question in the sortation process about your attitudes on climate change, and if you're very concerned, those sorts of things. And we decided in the meeting to base it on what we think Oxford opinion would be. So city boundaries. So all of it's within the city boundaries, because it's city council tax money and it's services that are provided by the city council. So it's not going to go out to people who are outside the city boundaries, which was kind of contentious actually in the meeting. But I can't see how it could possibly be like how the council could have a mandate to going out to other people. So anyway, people did see that, but they did say it's going to be different from, because there's loads of people in like West Oxford who work in, if you live in Botley, you're not going to get this, even though you're basically in Oxford. And obviously everyone who commutes to Oxford, and massively Oxford's a part of their life, they're not going to get it. That's a problem with like doing things on a local scale, not a national scale. Anyway, so everything within the city boundaries, and everything's going to be representative of Oxford. So the ethnicity mix will be representative of Oxford, the age will be representative of Oxford, not nationally or anything. And then the climate change attitudes will be representative of Oxford, which I think is really good, because we assumed in the meeting that Oxford would have, generally speaking, with a higher level of education, relatively prosperous, higher propensity to want to take action on climate change. Mori are going to do some clever statistically stuff, and they will be able to work out from things like largely educational status what people's attitudes on climate change. So they'll be able to extrapolate from data they have in Oxford as to the numbers on who feel positive about climate change, about taking action on climate change. So they don't have that level of detail, like granular detail about how Oxford thinks about that, because that's never been done, but they're going to extrapolate it. Anyway, so that's good. So then the two questions, the coming on to the content and the framing, it was interesting that I didn't get the impression the council really knew what it was that they wanted. So, and they actually said themselves, like, at one point, I've got it written now with quotes, Susan said, "We're still working out what we want to get out of it." Now, at that point, I said, wow. I didn't say it like this, obviously, I was like, really nice. I was like, it feels like it's quite soon, given that we're still kind of working out first principles. It's 11 weeks away, and like actually what you want to get out of it. We talked, quite a long time about what they wanted to get out of it. And I said, it seems like it's quite soon, there's a lot to do, and if you don't quite know what you want yet, is there any way it could be pushed back? Because, we want to do more work on, we want to do more of a publicity campaign on what Citizen Assembly is, this is a real chance, blah, 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 to explain to the city, and that was absolutely off the agenda. Susan was not moving on that, which is, no surprise to me. Anyway, I did want to just raise it, I didn't push it. But even though they said they didn't know what they want, I think actually they do, really. They want to know, it's trade-offs. They want to know, how far do they push going carbon zero over getting people off the street, or all the other things that they have to do. And they really, really, really want to know that. And they want to know how far they can push these things, and what the order of priority is for ordinary people. What was interesting was that it ended up being a very general discussion. We were then talking about the topics. So we were then talking about waste and recycling, transport, housing, blah, blah, all the different aspects of what the city does. And we talked about having 4 themes, and the same way the Brexit ones had migration and trade, we talked about having, I can't remember what the 4 were, 4. And then I was like, this is way too many, like in one weekend, in 2 weekends, but really one in terms of learning about the issues, because the second part is is the deliberation and decision phase, to get climate breakdown around your heads, and then learn about 4 things, and then learn about what the city is able to do, and like what the boundaries are, and then learn about the 4 issues, and and so everyone agreed that was too many. Alan Renwick and the Mori guy said I think it's 3 and below, so it might even only be 2 issues. What was interesting is that it felt like this, at one point it felt like climate change had been totally forgotten about, that like this was a general citizens' assembly about council policy and how council should budget, because you could do a perfectly legitimate citizens' assembly on how the council should budget. Like you could definitely do that, like all the things they've got to do, what's your priorities, and you could do a really amazing citizens' assembly on that, and arguably they should. But at one point they were even talking about, they were planning at the time, Susan was planning at the time in her head mentally, and hadn't planned in anything for climate breakdown. I was like, whoa, this is a citizens' assembly, we've got to have a decent amount of time on climate breakdown. Like there's got to be half a day at least in the 4 days that we've got on climate breakdown. And she was like, oh yeah, of course, and totally immediately agreed with me. But I thought it was interesting that she had completely forgotten about it. Anyway, so they really don't know whether they want to do it directly on the direct services thing. They're, like their 2030 zero carbon, do they make their fleet electric type questions, or about how to influence others. Now, I got the impression in the room that people want it to be about how to influence others, because that's way more interesting, that 2050 one on that paper. That wasn't fully decided at the meeting. So anyway, I think we're going to talk. It was a well-chaired meeting, and it's pretty speedy. Like we got through a lot of things, but there were a lot of things to get through. Like they are going to be seriously tight meetings, and we didn't get anywhere near what we actually wanted to on the agenda. And that's with like Susan being quite on it in terms of chairing it. So yeah, there was a bit of a split between some people saying you need to have really, really, really tangible, like get some shovel-ready projects that your councillors can cost up and everything. Like what we're going to do in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of the budget, and get them really tangible, and then people can decide on them, and you'll get like an idea of prioritising. I think I pushed back at that point, or I certainly want to, but other people did. I can't quite remember what happened at that point, but we didn't fully decide to do that, and I'm glad we didn't, because I think shovel-ready projects that people can get their head around the next 2 to 3 years will not be interesting or radical in terms of tackling climate change. Like one of the reasons we don't do it well is because we only think in short-term election cycles, 3, 4, 5 years, and I think that would be the same if we just presented the residents with a bunch of things for the next 2 to 3 years and said, which ones would you like? They'll go for the ones that are most needed right now in the next 2 to 3 years, as anyone would. Anyway, I think they're doing a good job. I don't think it's going to be the best citizens' assembly ever. I don't think it's best practice. I think it's going to be solid. I think it's going to be good. I think generally speaking, people are doing a good job because they do good jobs. But I don't think in any way does very many people in the room get how climate and ecological breakdown is different from any other. Like, I think they sort of think it's a bit like bad, like the housing crisis is bad, like, or, some other issue like Brexit. And I think there's not that many people in the room who are like passionately interested in it. And probably one of the things that I'm most concerned about is that the communication about climate breakdown itself will be very, very scientific, well communicated, cold, rational. I mean, it should be rational, obviously, but like appealing to the head only and not to the rest of it. And so I am pushing for that. So, God, I'm sorry, this is turning out to be a really long video. I hope this isn't really boring for you. So I'm going to be pushing for 4 people. Well, I don't want to make that many suggestions because I think I should really try to keep my number of suggestions low. So now we're into suggesting the experts. So in the next week, we need to suggest all the experts that we want by the 24th of July. So the people I'm going to focus on, and what I've done so far since the meeting, I've contacted George Monbiot to say, this is what's happened, please give me some experts. Not heard anything. He's filming and doing various things. I've contacted Jamie Clark, who's the director of Climate Outreach, the Climate Change Communications Organisation, who I thought was being involved because they were banded around in the first draft of the paper that came around, but then they disappeared for the second draft, and then they weren't mentioned in the thing. But I really think they need to be involved, either with Maury's end, like framing the whole thing, or they need to be involved in explaining climate change at the beginning. And then I've also contacted Jo Hamilton, our lovely Jo Hamilton from XR, because she is part of the Climate Psychology Alliance, and she has pulled together a simple paper that explains why you have to take into account people's emotions and the psychology behind in climate change, which is really useful. And she's going to suggest somebody, but I'm also going to take parts of her really simply written paper, which has like proper referencing and stuff, to try and make the point that we have to have some time for that. And it's a process thing, not being presented to expert thing. We've got to have some, like, Maury's got to build some time into the agenda for it. And then I've also contacted Kate Rayworth, who's the economist who does the donut economics. You can check her out, but like she basically talks about planetary limits and then also social goods, and how we need to find that bit in the middle without overshooting planetary limits and under creating social good. Anyway, so she's really great for framing that social justice and planetary stuff together. She is Oxford based, so she'd be absolutely amazing, but she doesn't know she's available that weekend. I don't also know if I kind of made it sound that amazing to her. I just like messaged her on Twitter. I should have possibly built it up a bit more. Anyway, I might just message her quickly again saying, this is really important. Anyway, so I'm going to stop because I've already made you a video. It's 20 minutes long. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop. But basically, I hope this helps shorten our meeting next week or whenever. And what I'm going to do now is put together this email to the City Council with my recommendations, mainly focused on the climate psychology stuff, and also suggesting climate outreach are like heavily involved, and giving some general points that I wanted to have time to make in the meeting. The thing that I think is really important, really interesting for us to think about is observers. So there'll be a small number of observers. So this advisory council people are all invited. The other things I think we really need to get on it is getting observers there from other councils in the area, so the county council and the district councils, but also things like the local enterprise partnerships and the other things that the council can influence. So this is the sort of thing that Liz was talking about in the meeting that I don't think I was getting at the time. But basically, we want to get people to understand that this is like a proper process. It isn't a talking shop, because the city council are really pushing back about a lot of people who are like, this is a £200,000 talking shop, and I can understand that people saying that, so we need to get people there who are going to be interesting partnership people that need to be influenced. So people at BMW, people at wherever, and it's going to be hard. It's a weekend, 2 weekends. And it's also they're quite boring to watch. Apparently, I mean, I can imagine there's loads of talking at tables. Like they are. I know what the kind of format is. Like they are boring to watch. So, but I do think we need. If we can get on that, I think we can suggest observers or invite observers maybe. That hasn't been seen yet. Okay. Then you can still register online to be part of this residents' assembly thingy, residents panel. So therefore, you might get picked for the citizens' assembly. I can't find out the link for it. I've searched everywhere. I've asked Richard Pantlin. I'll let you know as soon as I find out. Then I think that's it, because otherwise I'm going to talk forever and ever and ever, and you're going to be incredibly bored of me and not have any time to watch this. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Bye. See you soon.